And the reason I make much of Beauty and the Beast, by the way, I do think that's the fundamental female myth. So you want someone who has the capacity to say no, but who can be enticed and invited into a relationship, like a mentoring relationship and one of provision and cooperation. Another sort of prince, apparently in the Beauty and the Beast motif, is the trainable monster. And you might say, well, why do you want the monster? And the answer is, well, someone's got to keep the psychopaths at bay. Right. And trainables, right? So it's a very tight line for women to negotiate, right? Because if they find a man who's got no capacity for monstrosity whatsoever, and a monster comes along, he's done. But if they pick a guy who's too monstrous, then he can't cooperate, and he's not going to, be cooperative with her and the children. So that women have a very, very small eye hole in the needle to thread. Yeah. Part of the reason I think that, this is very comical, I think. So
you ought to meet
the Google boys.
You ought to meet my wife and see who she married. I'll tell you that.
Right. Well, so the comprehensible story. So the Google boys, a long while ago, got together and analyzed female pornography use online, billions of data points. And they identified the core female pornographic narrative. And women use verbal pornography, not visual pornography, right? So you can see this, and it's like an erotic harlequin romance. It's always the same thing. There's 5 cardinal male figures: surgeon, pirate, billionaire, werewolf, and vampire. Those are common protagonists. And the theme fundamentally is that this male is attractive to many other males and is dangerous, but can be enticed into a relationship across time by the right woman. It's the Beauty and the Beast motif. And that's the core motif for the vast preponderance of female pornography. Like, the narrative theme has been identified. It's exactly what is in 50 Shades of Grey. Right.
As when the toxic masculinity started being talked about a lot, and I got asked a bunch about these things. And what I answered that question with a lot was, well, if you take any characteristic or any trait of a human and you take it to an extreme, of course it's going to turn bad.
Right.
It doesn't really matter what, even something like being generous. Like, if someone is generous, they're so generous, they give everything away and they get taken advantage of. So any trait, if you take it to an extreme, it'll become a negative. And that'd be, with the traditionally feminine traits and the traditionally masculine traits, it's the same thing. Oh, it's to say it's bad to be aggressive or assertive. Well, yeah, can you be too aggressive and too assertive and now you don't listen to anybody else, you just go running around slapping people? Like, yes, that's terrible. But the other end of the spectrum is now you're just kind of complying to the whims of whoever's around. It's an equally bad scenario. So what you want to be as a human being is be balanced. And yeah, you got to have some capacity to be a bit of a monster when you need to be, but you've got to be able to contain that and discipline that, and you'll end up in a pretty good spot. And that goes with just about every characteristic that a human being can have.
Well, you see this very clearly in analysis of personality trait distribution. So you can imagine that there's advantages being extroverted, but there's disadvantages, impulsivity, and there are pathologies, mania. Like, mania is a pathology of extroversion, impulsivity as well, because one of the things that positive emotion does, and extroverts are higher in positive emotion. You think, well, you can't have too much of that. It's like, yes, you can. Mania is too much positive emotion. And so is impulsivity, because positive emotion makes you much more likely to act precipitously in the present. Because your nervous system is saying, well, everything's good right now. Make hay while the sun shines. And so if you have a pronounced proclivity for positive emotion, it'll manifest itself in impulsivity, right? And so there, as you pointed out, so you might say, well, it seems cosmically unjust that talents are distributed inequitably. But if you understand that there are no talents without a corresponding cost, then the situation becomes much more complex. This is even true of intelligence. Like, I think there isn't anything that you could be granted by the genetic lottery that will make more of a difference in your life than raw IQ. And a huge part of that is biologically determined, far more than people would ever want to admit. And it's really quite shocking. But the biggest, traditionally, the most unforgivable and deadly sin has been associated with the intellect. Because the intellect is so powerful that it can fall in love with itself, and then you get the Luciferian intellect, essentially.